Okay, so with that being said, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for another Oncourt.ca Zoom presentation. Today we have Jocelyn Robichaud, Director of High Performance Coaching at Tennis Canada with us. As a coach, Jocelyn was involved as a national coach at the National Tennis Center in Montreal from 2007 until 2016. There he was involved in many of the players' development, including Felix Auger-Aliassime, and was the coach of the Junior Davis Cup team. Jocelyn also had quite the playing career, including 3 Junior Grand Slam championships at the Australian Open, Wimbledon, and the US Open in doubles, as well as 3 ATP Challenger doubles titles, and a career high of 119 on the ATP doubles tour. Jocelyn also competed for Canada on the Davis Cup team. We are lucky to have the knowledge, passion, and experience of Jocelyn with us today. So welcome, Jocelyn.
Thanks, Mike, for the introduction. So it's my pleasure to be here, and it's great to see a lot of you, some familiar faces that I haven't seen in a long time, unfortunately. But it's great that we can regroup like this. So thanks for organizing this, Mike, and with Ace and everybody. So this is a great opportunity. So now comes the moment of truth where technology, I'm going to try to share my screen and start with the presentation. Hopefully it all works out.
Perfect. And for those of you just joining in, we will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. And at the end, you'll be able to either type your questions into the chat or use the raise hand feature, and I can unmute you, and then you can ask Jocelyn in person.
So are you seeing the first slide here, or are you seeing?
Yes, yeah, we see the impact of confinement on children's level of play.
All right, perfect, great, good. So it should be fine. Thanks, Matt. So, all right, so basically it's a short presentation that I kind of put up in the last 2 weeks or so, and it's a little bit based on what I was living, from what I was hearing from colleagues, from other parents, other coaches, and I kind of wanted to bring some key points in this presentation, and it's hopefully like some points that will be raised up, might bring back some reflections to you, and yeah, so that's more of a reflection. It's based also, not really based on research. I mean, there's a lot of articles I've been reading, and that I've been picking some points here and there, and then we'll go through some key points, and then we can discuss at the end about it. But actually, to make a sort of funny and try to put us in the concept a little bit, I was 3 days ago, I was like, while I was working on this presentation, I was like, this is like playing a tennis match a little bit, like this COVID-19 is like an opponent that you didn't know about it, and caught you by surprise, and you lost the first set 6-1. You regroup a little bit, and then you adjust your game style, find tactical situation, and then you try to battle and end up winning the second, and now we're like up 5-1 in the third. We're gonna come with the victory, and now you're up 5-1, you kind of get overconfident, want to try for bigger shots or whatever. And then first thing you know, you get out of a little bit of your game style, and then 5-2, no big deal, 5-3. And then the opponent comes back, and then you might have some up and down, and the only thing you want to do is close it out. So we're down the stretch in the third, and we just got to keep our distance a little bit for a few more weeks, keep our game style to close that out. So I thought it was a good analysis with what's our situation. So just hang in there, everybody, stay tough, and I'm sure we'll get through it. And so that was a little bit my presentation. So overall for the presentation will be, there's 4, I divided in 4 sections. Wanted to just establish a little bit the current pictures at the moment, okay, what we're going through, coaches, parents, and the second section is on sport-specific development, so mostly on the kid, and important values of the competitors and the anticipated return. So that's the four key sections that we'll go through. It's there's only 12 slides. We're already at the second one. So, but I mean, I'll try to explain it and go through it. Feel free to write some questions during the presentation. So Mike, if you feel free, if there's a good question that goes in there, just intervene, no problem.
Perfect, sounds good.
Good. So I thought it was important to reassure young athletes, parents, and coaches like yourself during this period of confinement, knowing that we're slowly but surely approaching a return to play. And this presentation focuses a little bit more on children from like 7 to 14 years old. I mean, it does apply a little bit to older, above 15, but I think when you're over 15, you have a little bit more maturity, more autonomous than under 14, under 15. So that's why I think the things that I'll be bringing up are a little bit more related to the kids under 14 years old. So I thought I would start with this this famous triangle that everybody has seen, and over. There's way different sort of type of. I pick up this this picture, but there's different ways. That's basically what it is. I mean, it's that's the situation that it was before COVID-19, where you had the child was the priority, and the coach was kind of leading his development in the tennis environment, and then you had the parent in there that, and now in our days, was more involved, so needed to be a little bit more involved in the decisions, and parent and coach were working together for the benefit of the child, with obviously the coach leading the development. So that was the famous triangle. And I thought it was important because I think now, which brings me to my next slide, I think it was important because my next slide, this is what I came up with. I don't think that triangle it's a little messy right now. I think, as you can see, the world is different, and it's more chaotic than before. Okay, so most of us are just trying to provide continuous development for the children, to prepare for their return to play, while ensuring that they have not lost any of their qualities. But before, I put the teachers on the left because before we didn't have, like, as coaches, we didn't have to worry too much about that. Kids were going to school, a little bit, obviously if they had kind of had to put it in the schedule if it was exam seasons or whatever. But overall, the teacher, everything was happening at the school, everything was kind of happening at the courts for the coaches. And now the parents is a little bit stuck in the middle of that, all that chaos, with the teacher sending a bunch of website, a bunch of work to do. And a little bit on the coach's aspect, I mean, we'll see later, it depends on the coach. But so now it's kind of the parent who's like in the middle trying to managing all that situation, and he's trying to do the best for the child. But there's obviously a lot of information coming. And my personal experience, and I have spoke to some parents as well, some friends of mine, and I could see that coming because first when school went off, they said, okay, well, we'll call this a little bit vacation for 2 weeks. And then they came back right away saying, no, it's not vacation. It's going to take longer. So we're going to readdress, we're going to do school teacher will send you work, and they were a little bit disorganized. So math teacher, French teacher, phys ed teacher were not communicating together, and we were just being bombarded by a bunch of emails left and right. And it was difficult, as well as you have to manage your work situation. So it was very, very chaotic, lots of information coming, and you're just trying to funnel everything that and try to prioritize a few things here and there for the child. And that's a little bit my personal experience. At the end, what you feel you're doing 50% of everything. So the school, you're not succeeding. You're just trying to do the minimum or the maximum that you can, but at the end it's 50%. Same with the sport. You know, if they're playing tennis, you're receiving some information and you obviously try to connect. And I know even some coaches wrote to me they're missing this webinar because they were actually doing a Zoom meeting. And my son is actually at Tennis Montreal, and at 4:45 he has a workout schedule on a Zoom call. So and we have two computers at home, so he's using one, I'm using this one, so my wife's got a skip worker in between, you know. So it's all things to manage in a little bit. So if we end up feeling and probably doing, you know, like at least we're feeling that we're doing 50% of the work, though it brings me to the current facts a little bit here, where, you know, the reason why brings me to the research, the number one research, you know, like if we feel we're doing 50% of the work, there's a research on point 1 where it says every child's education in the world will regress slightly or not advance to their expectabilities. So that was a webinar that was given last week. It was very interesting. And I'll just make a quick story a little bit around that webinar, is that the woman puts a story in the future. So it's like a kid who's 10 now becomes grandfather. So the story goes 15 years in the future, and he's being asked by grandson, is like, hey, grandfather, you survived, you know, the COVID-19, and it must have been awful, you know, at that time. You couldn't go out, you couldn't see your friends, you couldn't hug, and it was so the story goes on, and the grandfather replies, and he says, well, you know, actually, it was the time where I got to be a kid again, where I actually never had so many dinners with my parents, was able to play with my sisters and brothers more than ever. And so he tries to reverse the negative into the positive. So it was a good conference. And at the end, she finishes, and the main message, you know, is that it's important to remember how the children will remember those times, you know, and be in control of the memories they are creating now, so that through all the awful, like, headlines and emotional stories for so many that they will come to read in future years, they can remember actually the happy times, you know. And I'm sure some of you, that's what you're doing by connecting with them, and, you know, like via various sources. And it's just like showing the care that you're providing by doing whatever workouts or just little connections and things like that. So try to turn this in a positive manner, you know, and through this tough time. So that was a good presentation, and I thought it was important to bring it to you also, to just put you in the context, and then you can put that in a little bit in your tennis environment. And the slide 2, the number 2, it's obviously, like I just mentioned, the parents are multitasking more than before, more than ever, actually. And you know, they all have different expertise, you know, like some, which will bring me later in a slide, but some are more knowledgeable in the whatever physical development, some are workload, they have different resources, but at the end they all need to multitask to receive everything, like we've seen from the teacher, from the coaches, and also their own environment, their own work. So it's not that easy, and but it's doable, and it needs some guidance. And the simpler it is, the easier it is for them, you know. So, and the last one is each coach is in a situation, you know, so a role which influence their action, obviously. So you have like coaches that, you know, they're keep their job, they still have a little bit of revenue, they'll be really involved, and some for their jobs, so they might disconnect more and not give up, but be less involved with their players. So that's also to take, but it's a fact, you know. So which brings me, you know, so we're all like bombarded from side to side with what we're doing 50% a little bit, and it can be stressful. thing to know is that we can compare this period right now that we're living to an injury or rehabilitation, that some athletes, had injuries like, I can say like Nadal, simply as an example, had to go through difficult and needed to miss some competitions and things like that. And if you can also take the example of younger players. Bianca Andreescu had a stress fracture on her foot when she was 15, I think, or 14, I believe, 15, sorry, around that age anyway. And Felix had a knee injury. They both were out for quite a long period. And it doesn't when they come back, they're still able to takes them maybe a little bit of time, but they're still able to achieve some excellent results when they come back to competition. So that's a little bit one of the message that as coaches we need to be aware, and it's important to know that it's not because they're in that environment for yes, it's long, but it's a fact, and hopefully they'll be able to bounce back. So at home causes everyone to go through also some secret training, I call it. I put in brackets secret training, because at the end you're kind of doing your own thing in your house or in your environment, and nobody really knows. Nobody of your opponent really knows what you're doing, so it causes a little bit of an uncertainty, not knowing what others are really doing. It could worry you or worry us, like, are we doing enough? Or maybe the other person is doing more, and you can start questioning yourself a little bit like this. But if you use this opportunity, to make sure young athletes are staying fresh, when the time comes back to push harder, and you stay focused on the child's need and don't fall into the social, I call it social media trap, because there's a lot of like trick shots that you'll see on the social media, and like, oh my God, this person's doing this, I got to be able to do this. And then you kind of get sidetracked on all those little like challenges that you might see from, or trick shots that you might see from others. But at the end, the kid just needs to follow his journey, and everything will be fine. And that's up to us coaches to, kind of close that funnel a little bit and redirect them in the right direction. So this slide is a little bit out of context, but I thought it was important to put it on because it goes back to a little bit my introduction that I just did to you. And it's actually 3 people that I assist. They were doing a 30-minute webinar, and I had the chance to listen to them. And it's funny because they all have the same answer, and it was given by a different person, actually, the webinar. Sometimes you don't need a car, you don't look for a car, but then, when you do need a car, you see the same car all the time more often. So maybe I was looking for that kind of question, but anyway, so it came out, and one of the was, how do you handle stress and fearful situation, and then on the left you have like David Saint went into the space. His biggest fear was go into space, so leave the space craft into the space. So for him, that was the biggest stressful situation, because apparently if it goes wrong, you can like disappear. And for the second person, Jean-Luc Brassard, who was acrobatic skiing, he put the stressful moment is like doing an exam in school or something. So for him, there was some more important exams than others, and the biggest stressful, the higher the tournament were, the competition, I should say, the more stressful it was for him. And then you have Georges St. Pierre, who was a former UFC side. He said I was always scared when I was going on the, but at the end, what they all said, they all came out with 3 points, was that the preparation was so key. They were all so well prepared that it take away some of the fear. And it was impossible to prepare for this scenario right now, the COVID-19. So there's, it was impossible to, the only thing we can do is the only thing they can do and we can do is to adapt ourselves. And so preparation, unfortunately, was not really a possibility. And then understanding the situation environment. So they were preparing and understanding what they were going into. Like Jean-Luc Brassard was going a week earlier, analyzing the muggles and everything. And so that we can do a little bit, we know a little bit our situation and environment, although we haven't been trained for it. And the other one was to take away all the outside noise, minimize the outcome. So that, again, that we can definitely do, as I said, as coaches and parents, we can centralize, refocus and reassure them that to take the right direction. And for me, the number 3 is the most important one, is to try to minimize all the outside noise, all the information they're getting on the social media and everything, and just like not make them worry too much that competition will come back. Okay. And when it comes back, it's okay. Actually, on the podium just came out and they said they recommended to all the Olympic athletes that they shouldn't try to have a peak performance this year. So when they're doing their yearly plan, they shouldn't plan any peak performance in 2020 this year. So they need to make sure that when they're going to come back, they have to go gradually. So I thought it was an interesting process, but that's it. So that brings me a little bit to my next slide, which is this is what I came up with. So on top left, you'll see the picture. It's the curve. So if the number of confirmed cases COVID-19 with no intervention and intervention, and if you reverse the curve, it's exactly a little bit what we're doing. We're, as coaches, we're trying to flatten the curve so our player don't go down too much. So we're just trying to provide them some trainings or a few things that we'll see in the next couple of slides. But our goal is very simple, is to do like switch the curve around and try to flat too much. And the other slide on the right is the typical training concept, where you kind of like overload, make the kid tired, make them rest, and then you have your peak, and then you can baseline every time and then increase the performance of your player. And that's a little bit what we're doing. So we're kind of improving in some areas without even knowing in this confinement, because hopefully the kids are doing other things. Then they're obviously doing less tennis, hitting the ball, but they might be doing some running, they might be doing things. So it might they might regress in tennis a little bit, but they might improve in other areas. So hopefully they'll be able to bounce back and use those me to the learning motor skills. The next one, it's a little bit one of the concepts that we're using, that we're trying to teach to the coaches, is to use variability training. So you hit the forehand, backhand, mix it up a little bit, not only like routine and baskets on the same side. So learning motor skills, it's important to use lots of variability in training. A little bit like when you're a kid, it's very important to do in sports. So now it's actually a great occasion to actually experiment different sports, and they'll be able to use in tennis when they come back. So that's a little bit the concept. this slide, and that said, I wrote here. So having encountered experienced coaches, who have lived and managed situations that put their players out of the game for an extended. Them were this episode of inactivity in the game had not slowed down their players' progress in the long term. Okay, so like we mentioned a few names earlier. So generally, they concluded that if this period is well managed, it can be often beneficial. And these experienced coaches use common methods, and philosophy, using work on the physical aspect, develop also various facets of their games. And so we all have pictures of various people, training when they were injured or anything. But now the players are not injured, but they can still, use this time and work on those areas that I just mentioned. And so now we're just going to go to the sport-specific development. Now, I think it was point 2 or 3 in my overall presentation. So what can we do, to develop some of the areas for players? A lot of you actually, I'm sure, came up with a lot of things that I'm going to say, and which is great. And maybe there might, ring a bell and that you can add in your communication with players. But bottom line, what you need to understand is the opportunity to focus on specific aspect of the child while experimenting different activities in order to develop different skills. It is beneficial to keep young athletes sports orientation, either by viewing previous matches that they've been showing on TV, like you're mostly aware. Maybe a specific footwork movement that you want him to be able to, you can send them on the TPA. TPA has a lot of resources that you can send them on the ITF website. A lot of them are free actually at the moment. So it's a lot of a good time actually for the kids to see and to visualize a little bit in that aspect. And can even be develop a technical shots in their game, listening to interviews with players or coaches from different sports also. Can be in their own sport, but in different sport. It's Wayne Gretzky was doing a 30-minute interview last week on, he did the movie In Search of Greatness. They were doing a 30-minute interview last week, and I think actually on Facebook. And I think next week is so it's only 25 minutes, but they mention things like that, and sometimes the kid can pick up something, that whatever it is, and even coaches. So there's a lot of good things out there, and also listen to interview with players and coaches, research what great players did when they were their age, and possibly take on and off field challenges. So all these things. So in short, what you want to do is keep the motivation, inspire the children, while respecting and understanding that the situation is different from them too, so do not overdose them, because at the end, the desire has to come from them and definitely influence them, same with the parents. So all these little things can help stimulate and inspire some technical development skills, and which actually brings me to the next slide, which is that was an experience I had a week or 10 days ago. It was I'm up north. I left Montreal. We have a family cottage, so we left Montreal maybe 7 weeks ago, because it was getting a little chaotic, and there was more activities for kids to do here. And we went in the backyard, the playground of the school, and there was a guy training there. And make a quick story short, so he's training really hard, and I'm like, okay, so what is that person really doing? So I asked him, I said, you doing a specific sport or something? He's like, yeah, hockey player. I said, okay. So I said, who do you play for? You know, and he says, well, I'm Quebec Major League. Yeah. So I said, oh, what's your name? I played not Canada Cup. I played for Team Canada. So I said, oh, what's your name? And then he said, my name's Samuel Poulin. And actually, my kid knew he was drafted by Penguin Pittsburgh. But what I want to go up is that he was doing a training, really intense training by his, the middle picture is his father, actually, who was training him. And that goes back actually to my first couple slides where the parent is really, really involved at the moment. And he was doing his father was doing training and timing him and everything. And he was, Samuel was doing they brought a cooler, camping cooler with 2 wheels, and they load that up of rocks of big rocks. So it made weights. And he was pushing it and pulling it back, you know, doing push-ups. And after that, 2 series of pushing and pulling it back, there was a hoop in the back on the left picture. There was actually a basketball hoop, and he had to do 5 layups. So while his legs were tired, a little bit like in the course certification when we talk about dissociation, the upper and lower body, like in tennis, he had to jump. And then even the legs were tired. He needed to keep soft hands to put the basketball in the hoop, and he needed to do to make it 5 times. So if he would miss, he would go again. So, and it was a really, really nice to see it, and some concept in hockey that we have the same in tennis. But bottom line, there's always a way to train hard and to and to push yourself. So I just wanted to make a side story. Creative is very important at the moment. So if you're able to imagine a little bit and create things, like you can come up with some excellent exercises. And it's tough for him. So it's tough to keep that training and not knowing when you're going to go back, you know. So I'm sure you've read about that, but at the end you want to think that your competitors are doing similar things to you. The competitors' values, which, you know, the routine right now, it's disrupted, you know. So the professional players, even young kids, you know, they're used to be in a routine. I mean, wake up at 7, go to school, go this, you know. They were on a tight morning to the evening, you know, finish school. Okay, after tennis club, you train, you do your fitness, then you go back, you do your work. They were scheduled by the minute. So, and all that routine has been disrupted a little bit, and that's a fact that needs to be addressed. And which brings me the second one is how to keep the competitive spirit, you know, and motivation, and develop important values that the athlete will need later on. So it's actually a 90-year-old time right now to build on key values, and several essential qualities can be developed, you know, to become I called it an everyday champion. But it's because everyday champion, it could be on court, but it could be later in life as well. And those values are critical. And so the ideal moment, you know, to stimulate, for example, the creativity, the adaptation, and the autonomy. I'll go back to the adaptation. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's not. I had a perfect example today, actually, with my oldest son, which they were supposed to start school May 19, and then we listened to the government at 1 o'clock, and there's too much cases going on still, so they pushed back the school an extra week, and he was going crazy. He was so happy, you know. So that was an easy way to adapt himself. But but when they announced that school was going to start, you know, because he thought that school was done for the rest of the year, that was a harder thing to adapt. So adaptation is one way because things are always changing. So you never really know. You can plan something and then it changes. So adaptation is a very important factor to be able, like you can develop that in this period of time. Same thing with autonomy of your young athletes. Like the trainings you might give them, they might have to do it on their own, watching the screen without somebody beside pushing them and everything. So it's a perfect time to create to improve that. There's also like several leadership qualities, such as sharing, integrity, responsibility, empathy, and positivity can be addressed. I find one is actually important is resilience, is another psychological aspect to develop, and it can be improved by simple things, in our day-to-day life, just simply by, you can go walk and climb a mountain, for example, and it's a challenge, something challenging, something that's tough. Hiking a high level trail, that is very difficult on a long period, for example, so it creates some resilience. And you can work also on persistence to solve an intellectual problem and things like that. So you're battling in the third set, it's long, you put them a mathematical problem or whatever, and they might, after 10 minutes, they might want to give up and say, I can't do it, and work on persistence and resilience. So in summary, there's several activities outside of the sport and fitness that can be developed at this moment and that are important to do. And as well, it's important to remind them, to be a kid, take the time to be a kid, it's important to give them some free time, so they can develop their creativity. So that brings me, those were the key messages that I think hopefully you picked up on a key points that you can address with your players and parents. And this one, the last one, is just the anticipated return a little bit. It's the after confinement must be closely monitored in order to ensure that some athletes do not develop possible post-traumatic stress. So that was in a magazine, and an article that I read from. I thought it totally made sense. I thought it made sense because everybody we're super scheduled before, and based on whatever factor, like schedule wise or performance wise, and then when they come back, they're obviously not going to be at the same level. Okay, and you'll have to be careful of the volume and the intensity you're going to get back into it, because as coaches, we're going to be super motivated as well. We're going to be, he's back on court, let's go, and you're going to want to do more and more. But if you do whatever, an hour of serving, obviously you might get hurt or something. So it's going to be important to take all that aspect into consideration and make sure we plan accordingly. So there's a sort of a guiding the player back in a gradual so that's the just planning in order to keep motivation and goals. Yeah, so the goals, obviously the performance goals and everything will have to be reviewed. We basically shift the annual plan. I know, Mike, you're actually big in that, doing your coach for in the annual plan. So everything is being discabulated or something like with the word. But so we're basically we just need to readjust and put all the pieces back in the puzzles and make sure that comes out and the best interest for the players, and anticipate that the parents will actually be involved, like maybe even more, because they are actually extremely involved at the moment, so that's something that we'll have to deal with as coaches, and be totally fine and be like, finally, the coach is present, he's here, taking a load off my shoulder, and there we go, go from here. And so some parents might actually be more distance, who knows, but there's definitely going to be some changes, and others as well. So that's a little bit my presentation. So to conclude, the return of the game will be really joyful, and everybody's is waiting for it. We're all anxious, and just remember that your children will, not your children, but the children, the players, they'll continue to evolve, and they will all reach their personal destination in the long term, whatever it is. So we're just a little bit, we have to see it more as in a positive way, where they might have developed other values, other skills, other abilities, and maybe hopefully they'll come back more motivated than ever. So with that in mind, I think we'll all welcome. We're all anxious for the return of play, and I hope everybody will start somehow hitting on the wall and following the guidelines, and keeping the distance, but try to also find a way to keep the competitive spirit in there as well. Even if there's a distance and a little bit, it's always fun to compete and to play the game. So that's my message overall that I wanted to provide today, and that's mainly my presentation. That I thought there was some points that were interested to touch and to make us aware of. So that's
Awesome.
If there's any question.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you for the presentation. If anybody has any questions that pertain to, the situation we're in right now, or that pertain to Jocelyn's presentation, then you can feel free to either type them into the chat, or if you use the raise hand feature, I can unmute you, and then you can ask Jocelyn personally as well.
I'm just gonna add one thing. It's in link a little bit with the before Guillaume and came before 2007 at the National Training Center. We were not doing any camps. Every beginning of the year at the National Training Center, they take the kids and they bring them in the woods or something, and they do a training camp where for 7 days, and it's only they do that in France, and they brought it over here, and it's all about pushing themselves physically, and like running and climbing, doing bikes, doing walks in the wood at night with lights, all different experience that the kids might not have, and they push themselves really hard. So we only do it 1 week, but it does stimulate some qualities in the kids, and obviously it does put them in shape, but it develops also some mental qualities in their development. So that's a little bit, I didn't mention that, but there's kind of a link of that aspect that you can take that inside my presentation.
Awesome. Does anybody have any questions? I think everybody is a little bit shy today. And this, normally I do this with all the students, so I just pick on all the ones I coach and I just unmute them and put them on the spot. But I don't know if I start doing that with the coaches.
Looks like Matt has one. Matt has one.
They're all going to leave the chat otherwise. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'll unmute Matt. Let's see here. Okay, go ahead, Matt.
Okay, so first of all, let him say hi, or is he never going to leave me alone?
Okay.
Say hi.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. Now get out of here. Go do some push-ups.
No.
Jesus. I think that you have some good points. I have heard a lot of good points from the government as well, and there's some things that I agree with and I don't agree with. But what I'm saying is that your ideas, what are they based on? Because this is something that is very new, it's never happened before. So
Yep.
how are you able to predict the future or give advice for the future when this has never happened before?
Yeah. So like I said at the beginning, this is not research based or anything. It's more on article and some things on philosophies that we have with the colleagues or anything. And to be honest, at this point, nobody actually knows how it will
Well,
evolve.
that's the thing, right?
So
Nobody knows.
Yes. So we don't. So we need to be able to adapt and to hopefully do the best of this situation. So so that's the thing. You want to try to make the best out for the development of the players, for yourself, and for us. We find that if we're able to touch a few of those points, maybe not all. These were just the ideas and articles, and I kind of regroup and I provided that we think also, like at the National Training Center, after speaking with Louis and Guillaume, who were aware of most like of my presentation. I did an article actually, and they actually provided some good inputs in there. So it's not research based. It's based on our experience. It's a little bit, as coaches, we need to anticipate the future a little bit. When you're training a player, you need to train him for in the next 5 years or 10 years, how the game is going to be. And that's what we're trying to do at the moment. We don't know. Even like the best, like you're listening to the news or everything, you don't know where it's going to lead. So we're the same in the sport. We just received today the cancellation of tournaments until the end of August. Will there be tournaments in October? Who knows? We just need to be able to adapt. But in the meantime, you don't want to let the children on their own, or you want to keep them motivated in the sports and still evolves in the best resources that we have, and that they have as well. So
yeah, I think it's really about sharing ideas and trying, like you said, to do the best we can to adapt and kind of share ideas and take away what we can.
Well, it's to be aware also, to be aware of key points, like okay, this player, maybe it would be good if he doesn't go climb a mountain and make him tougher mentally, because when he was before COVID-19, maybe he was a little soft or something or whatever. And, or maybe it's good. Like every children's different, in their development. And these are just points to be aware of. And hopefully as coaches, you're able to pick and choose a little bit in there. So.
Right. Brandon, go ahead.
My question is, what kind of themes would you recommend players work on when they return to tennis? So, obviously for us, we have a lot of kids that are maintaining their fitness level, but we know that doing fitness and getting on court and the type of or the way you need to be in shape to perform on court is a little bit different. So would you recommend a lot of physical drills while playing tennis? Would you recommend just a lot of volume and consistency? Even during fitness, like group fitness or private fitness, what kind of stuff would you recommend?
Well, there'll be definitely some physical aspect to touch. The physical aspect will be big. So I think they'll lose a little bit of their mobility on court. Timing, finding the right impact point, and they'll be a little bit uncoordinated a little bit towards the sport if they haven't played in a while. Consistency will be important. Feel of the ball will be important, very important. Although you need to be careful not to start your training and giving a bunch of volume, just like as you don't want them to get injured either, So that's going to be tricky because it is really important to work on, but on the other side, you don't want them to be injured. So volume will be important, but it will have to be monitored accordingly. So that's a tricky one. But for me, really coordination, timing, like being able to slow down, get behind the ball at the right time, and all these, you've played tennis, Brandon, you know, you haven't served for a week and then you toss that ball and you're kind of like a little bit off balance. So it's these aspects will be important to touch, I think.
Yeah, great. Jay Barlow, go ahead.
Hey, Jocelyn. Yeah, so I'm curious. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of the kids are going to be coming back with a different amount of like exposure to different things, whether it be like fitness, a tennis court at their house, you know, a wall that they could access, or some people who are in a situation where they're not really able to access much of anything in terms of even like physical activity, just based on them, you know, living in an apartment or whatever their circumstances are. How are you guys gonna go kind of back? People are going to be at such a different kind of space in terms of where and what they've been doing over the last while. It's going to really complicate things as far as like group settings go.
It definitely will. It definitely will. I think it. I mean, I might sidetrack your question here. I think it's going to be interesting because I think that's where you'll see the true athletes coming out, where the kids that had lots and lots of volume, okay, and who's not super talented, he's obviously going to regress, and then the player who isn't playing as much, for example, but is more talented, they might be at a similar level when they come back, plus or minus, you know. So that's going to be so depending on actually on their abilities, on their talent, everybody, like you're saying, on also in their what they've been doing, everybody will be in a different bracket. So I think, I'm not speaking because at the National Training Center, the coaches, they have so few players that they'll be able to work individually or things like that. But in your environment, I think it will be very important to the first 3-4 weeks to be able to change kids around left and right, and just to be able to change people around a little bit. So you don't go back with the same 4 players that you had in February, and maybe it will be the same 4, who knows, but you have to be able to maybe take one out and bring one back in, and, you know, create a little bit of movement like this for the first few weeks. That would be the ideal. I don't know if you'll be able to do that, but I think that will be very a smart thing to do if it's possible.
It could also be a challenge as far as like confidence for players. If obviously you're now hitting with, because you haven't been able to hit, you're now not hitting with players who maybe have had access or whatever. So it's going to be a lot of challenges, but obviously some things we're going to have to work through.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, good question, Jay, and I think that was a pretty good answer. I mean, yeah, we're just going to have to kind of assess the players where they're at and see how much they have been doing and see where their physical levels are at, and then kind of make a plan going forwards, because like you said, everybody's going to be maybe at a different level physically, different level playing wise. So.
Yeah. And it'd be the same as if you have, like, if you have a group and one player gets injured in the group and he comes back a little bit, you know, is he going to come back right in the group, or he's going to come back a little bit on the sideline and slowly, gradually join back in the group? You know, these are,
yeah. Let's see here. I think Matt is. Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking, Jocelyn, because like you and I were both on tour. We overlapped a little bit. Like, I think you're a little bit older than me, but I was just thinking, like, I would smoke you, right?
What?
There's no way you'd beat me. I mean, you're good, man. You could do better than I did, but like, come on, man. I would kill you.
Maybe today, not back in the days.
Oh, okay. All right, yeah, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, Jocelyn's resume, I checked up like online to find out some points out to introduce you, and like it was pretty impressive resume. Does anybody else have any questions? Maybe we have time for one more if anybody
Pierre
else
has one.
anything. Oh, Pierre, okay. Let's see here. There we go. Go ahead, Pierre.
I just want to answer a couple of questions. By the way, Jocelyn, the only thing Matt could do was serve, and he never trained. So, like, it would have been easy. There's a couple of things. First of all, it is based on something. If you look at periodization, there's periodization for coming out when you're having your training season, your preparatory, you have it when you have an injury. All of those applies, those principles. The first thing that you do is that you evaluate where everybody is. And I think that it would be, and I say that because I hope we're doing this. You know, the first thing, and I've sent this to everybody, the first thing that you do is, you know, we should do a fitness assessment so that we can see who's where and at what level. Then you can also see as a coach, you know, you have to explain what's going to happen. That the first, I mean, what I've said is that, you know, for 9 weeks is a period this summer. And it's like the end of the summer for most of our kids is going to be when the provincials are week 8 and 9. So the first 4 or 5 weeks should be like a general preparation period, while week 6 and 7 is more of a competitive period, and week 8 and 9 is peaking, where people that go for gold or whatever it is, the podium, they won't peak this year. But with our kids, give them a story that they're going to buy in. You know, everybody is going to be crap the first week. Like, let's work together, let's support ourselves. You know, and you introduce. It depends on the coach weaving the right story, but having the right plan. So the plan is scientific. That's all that I thought.
Yeah, great point, Pierre. I agree.
Perfect. Any other questions before we thank Jocelyn for his time and effort? Like I mentioned at the start, the presentation will be posted on oncourt.ca, and there also will be an article attached to the presentation written by Jocelyn. So that will go up on the website, I believe, tomorrow for anybody that's interested.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and it's great to see some familiar faces, you know, and stay safe. Hopefully we'll connect in life together in a short time. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for taking the time, Jocelyn. Thanks everybody for joining in.
My
Take
pleasure.
care.
Bye.